I'm here today because an amazing author has given me permission to share a never-before-seen story with all of you. Yep, that's right, you are hearing it first. So buckle up as we join the crew of the USS Persistence in an encounter with a new alien species known as the Krellians. Also, if you enjoy science and text stories, please make sure to subscribe to my channel to get notified every time I upload a new episode. In the darkest edges of the Sagittarius Arm, a Krellian fleet of 15 warships glided effortlessly through the void. For 3,000 years, the Krellian Empire had roamed the stars unchecked, crushing civilizations, plundering resources, bending weaker species beneath their rule. Commander Vorthon had no reason to expect this mission would be any different. 6 eyes flickered in the reflection of starlight as his massive warship, Sovereign's Pride, led the way to the lesser races. He'd crushed before. The thought of resistance was laughable, and when his officers reported strange warning buoys floating ahead, the deck filled with mocking clicks and whistles, the Krellian version of laughter. But the warnings persisted, unmoving against the tide of space, and the commander's amusement grew tired. It was time to end this charade. Above them, unnatural constellations blazed with eerie light. And suddenly, a single word boomed across the Krellian fleet, resonating not just in their ears, but in their very bones. Welcome to the grave. At first, the fleet assumed it was a trap, some sort of gravitational anomaly warping sound. But as moments stretched into minutes, it became clear. This was no accident. Someone, or something, was watching. The source of the voice remained hidden, yet its tone was unmistakable. Patient, amused, omniscient. A low hum resonated from the depths of space. Then a crack appeared, splitting the darkness like a spider's thread. More followed, weaving together into a pathway of blinding light. Out of the rift stepped a single figure cloaked in shadows. The figure raised a hand, and the voice boomed again, echoing across the cosmos. So, the scavengers come seeking what they cannot comprehend. How quaint. Commander Vorthon recognized the Zarpti, though he had never laid eyes on one in person. Their reputation preceded them. Architects of the void, weavers of reality, they were said to exist outside the boundaries of time and space. And yet, here they were, standing before him, or at least standing in relation to him. Because from their perspective, he had no idea where they actually were in relation to him. They moved through dimensions after all, and their concepts of up and down, left and right, were meaningless. You trespass in a place you do not understand, the Zarpti continued, their voice vibrating with power. You seek to conquer what you cannot comprehend. Foolishness. The Zarpti spoke again, their tone turning cold. But foolishness ends tonight. As the Zarpti vanished, the fabric of space tore apart. Stars exploded into being, forming constellations unknown to any sentient species. Each twist and turn of the void now held both wonder and peril. And the scavengers found themselves trapped in a labyrinth of the warp. Vorthon watched in disbelief as the path behind them vanished, sealing their fate. They were lost in the web of weird, condemned to wander the endless expanse of the warp until they died. Or worse, found something far, far worse. Then a cruel smile spread across Voron's face. Let the weak cower. Let them scream into the abyss. He would show them true terror. In the deepest recesses of the void, within the labyrinth of the warp, Commander Vorthon reveled in his dark triumph. He had rewritten the laws of physics, bending the fabric of space to his will. His Krellian fleet might be trapped in the labyrinth of the warp, but they were not helpless. His ships were designed to navigate the chaos of extra-dimensional space, equipped with the latest in Krellian technology. He was ready to strike back against whatever entity dared challenge the might of the Krellian Empire. And yet, as the days bled into weeks, doubt gnawed at him. They had rewritten the laws of physics, yes, but at what cost? Was he merely delaying the inevitable? Had he condemned his fleet to a hopeless struggle against an enemy they could not hope to defeat? The vast emptiness of the warp pressed against the ships like a suffocating blanket, amplifying every creak and groan of the vessels. The crews, once proud and boisterous, grew gaunt and sullen. Morale plummeted as they realized the true extent of their peril. Supplies dwindled and despair spread. Would they become the first Krillina to die in battle? The thought was unbearable. Then, one day, as Vorin stood on the bridge of his flagship, staring into the heart of the warp, he saw it. A beacon of light piercing the gloom. Could it be? Hope surged through him. Was salvation at hand? With renewed determination, Vorthon ordered his fleet to charge toward the light. Perhaps there was still a chance of escape, a way to break free of the labyrinth of the warp. As the ships hurtled toward the beacon, the commander's heart pounded in his chest. Maybe they weren't doomed after all. Meanwhile, deep within the labyrinth, the architect of the warp watched the Krellian fleet move through the shifting expanse of his domain. He had created this prison to protect the universe from those who sought to exploit its power. And yet, here were these interlopers, breaking through his defenses, challenging his authority. The architect's patience had its limits, and as the Krellian fleet approached the heart of the warp, he prepared to unleash his full power. Suddenly, an alarm blared through the bridge of the Persistence, jolting Captain Webb and his crew out of their stupor. The sensors were picking up a massive energy surge in the outer regions of their trap, an aggressive signature unlike anything they'd encountered before. "They're powering up weapons," Alenko gasped, her voice tight with tension. "And they've got a lot of them. Sir, our shields can't hold." Webb exchanged a grim look with Alenko. He knew what this meant. These weren't just scavengers looking to plunder what they could. These were hunters ready to strike down anyone who threatened them. "Brace for impact," Webb ordered, his voice firm despite the fear that gnawed at his gut. "Shield at maximum. Mr. Hansen, divert all available power to weapons." The bridge crew scrambled into action, their movements sharp and efficient. On the view screen, the Krellian flagship loomed closer, its menacing silhouette outlined against the backdrop of the warp. Its weapons blazed to life, spewing forth bolts of searing energy that tore through the fabric of space-time. Webb gritted his teeth, fighting the urge to panic. They were outgunned, outmatched, but they couldn't run. There was nowhere left to hide. The Krellian commander had sealed off their escape route, just as the first blast slammed into the Persistence, throwing the ship into a violent shudder. Webb clung to his command chair, bracing for the worst. Their shield, already strained to its limits, buckled under the onslaught. The energy bolts tore through the defense, searing the hull of the Persistence, and suddenly the alarms changed. The hunters had become the hunted. Energy signatures. At first a trickle, then a torrent flooded their scanners. The ship's AI cried out in alarm as dozens, then hundreds of new arrivals crowded into the sector. And then they saw them on the view screen. Hundreds of sleek, sinister ships emerged from the swirling depths of the warp. The scavengers had brought reinforcements. Webb stared in disbelief as the newcomers closed in on the Krellian fleet. Their weapons blazing, he couldn't believe their luck. Could this be their salvation? Just when all hope seemed lost, help had arrived. The architect of the warp had answered their call, sending forth his own forces to drive back the invaders. But who exactly was leading the charge? The Krellian fleet was pinned in a crossfire between the architect's forces and the human defenders. Caught in the maelstrom of energy bolts and void maelstroms, Vorthon desperately searched for a way out. But the labyrinth of the warp had become a tomb, sealing the fate of the Krellis forever. Trapped in a prison of their own making, the scavenger fleet met their end in a blaze of glory. And as the last Krellian ship fell, a single figure stepped out of the shadows. The architect of the warp, cloaked in the essence of the void, surveyed the scene before him. His work was done. The universe was safe once more. But as he turned to leave, he sensed something stirring in the depths of space. A new power was rising, one that threatened to plunge the cosmos into darkness once more, and the architect knew that he would have to act once more to protect the balance of the universe. The battle was over, but the war had just begun. This is an excerpt from the book The Murderbot Diaries by Martha Wells. Murderbot is one of my all-time favorite science fiction series, and this is one of the best parts of it. And as a reminder to viewers, please do not feed the trolls. If you have a question about science or mathematics, feel free to ask it in the comments below, and hopefully I'll get around to answering it. As always, I'm here to answer your questions, so let's do it. Question for the Master from Nathaniel Hall. How fast would I have to rotate to fly through space? Your spaceship is in deep space away from any stars or planets. Can you move at exactly 90 degrees latitude and use the centrifugal force to cancel out the gravitational force? I assume you'd need infinite strength to make the turn without hitting anything. But with no atmosphere or anything to hold you down, couldn't you just keep going until you reached escape velocity and then you'd be orbiting the planet? Well, I actually think you can do this in principle, and there are lots of people who have looked at this question. And I think you can even go a little bit faster than 90 degrees latitude. That's because the centrifugal force depends inversely on the radius. So if you increase the radius, the centrifugal force goes down, and since you're getting stronger and stronger gravity as you approach a planet, you can actually compensate for a little bit more of that gravity if you increase the radius. But yes, you'd need infinite strength, or at least a strong space station to keep you up, whatever you need to do to avoid hitting the planet. And then, once you got out there, yeah, you're in orbit. It just so happens that the speed you would need to be in orbit is the speed of orbital velocity, which is pretty fast. It's about 28 kilometers per second, or 17.5 miles per second, and of course, once you're out there, you're stuck. I mean, if you didn't hit the planet, you're now in orbit around the planet and you're staying there. So congratulations, you successfully flew through space. Question from Eric Storm. Is there any way to create a new universe? Yes, but no. Let me explain. We know that the universe can expand. We see this when we look at distant galaxies. They're moving away from us, and the farther away they are, the faster they're moving away from us. We also know that the universe has a certain amount of curvature to it, which means that parallel lines eventually converge. And this tells us that the universe is flat. The surface of the universe is flat. But if the universe is flat, then there's really no reason why it should stop. It could just keep going forever. And in fact, most of the evidence we have says that it does keep going forever. However, it seems pretty clear that our observable universe doesn't keep going forever. There's something called the cosmic microwave background radiation, which is incredibly uniform across the sky. And if the universe kept going forever, there'd be no reason for that uniformity. All of that stuff would have had time to separate. So there must be something that's keeping the size of the universe finite. That could be another dimension, or it could be some other thing. We just don't know what it is. So, in that sense, the answer is we don't know why the universe is the size it is. But assuming that it's going to stay the size it is, then the answer is no. The universe isn't going to get bigger. The most likely scenario is that the expansion of the universe will continue to accelerate until everything drifts apart from each other and the universe gets bigger and bigger and darker and darker. Another possibility is that the expansion of the universe will slow down, and the gravity of all the matter in the universe will cause the universe to collapse in on itself. So the answer is no. We can't create a new universe because our universe is either expanding forever or collapsing forever. There's no new universes being created. The one we have is the one we got. Question from Andrew. Why don't the satellites used for GPS and Galileo drift off course due to the solar wind? That's an excellent question. And actually, I was thinking about this the other day because I was using my phone and I was like, wow, this is amazing. Like if you imagine that there's satellites in the sky giving you your position anywhere on the planet down to the centimeter, that's incredible. And I was thinking, How accurate do those satellites have to be? And I did a little bit of Googling, and I found out that they have to be good to 30 centimeters. That's incredibly precise. That means you can measure the position of these satellites down to 30 centimeters. And so I thought, well, what would cause a satellite to drift 30 centimeters over time? And I thought, well, what if you had charged particles coming in and pushing on the satellite? So I'll tell you a little bit about the satellites, and then I'll tell you how they deal with this problem. First of all, the GPS satellites run on atomic clocks. These clocks are incredibly stable and they lose less than a nanosecond per day. A nanosecond is a billionth of a second. So if you think about a clock that loses only a nanosecond per day, that's extremely accurate. And that accuracy is critical for GPS. The satellites also have to be very precisely oriented. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to tell which direction they were pointing. And that's important because the satellite knows its position and it knows its orientation, and then it uses that information to calculate what time it is. So if the satellite is pointed at the North Star, it knows how far north it is. And it knows what time it is based on the position of the North Star. And this is all done with gyroscopes. The gyroscopes are spinning wheels that resist changes in orientation, and they're really important for maintaining the stability of the satellite. The solar wind is a stream of charged particles that flows outward from the sun. It's mostly protons and electrons, but it also contains a small number of heavier ions. The solar wind is constantly bombarding the Earth and the other planets in the solar system. And it's a major problem for satellites. If a satellite is hit by a charged particle, it can be knocked out of position. And that's a big problem for GPS because the satellites have to be in a very precise formation in order to work. Now, there are two main ways that the GPS satellites deal with the solar wind. The first is that they're made of a special material called Kapton, which is a polyimide film. It's incredibly lightweight, and it's also resistant to the effects of the solar wind. The second way that the GPS satellites deal with the solar wind is by using a device called a plasma thruster. A plasma thruster is basically a little rocket engine that uses plasma instead of gas. Plasma is a superheated gas that has been stripped of its electrons, and it can be accelerated to very high speeds using electric and magnetic fields. When the plasma is shot out of the back of the satellite, it pushes the satellite forward. And this is how the satellites maintain their position in orbit. The solar wind is always pushing against the satellites, but the plasma thrusters are able to counteract that force and keep the satellites in place. Now, you might think that the solar wind shouldn't affect the GPS satellites because they're in a vacuum. But that's not true. The vacuum of space is full of charged particles, and that's what the solar wind is made of. So yes, the solar wind absolutely affects the GPS satellites. But thanks to their special materials and their plasma thrusters, the satellites are able to keep working even in the face of this constant bombardment. Question from Jamo. Does light ever get tired of traveling? Light travels at a constant speed, which is approximately 300,000 kilometers per second. This means that light takes about 8 minutes to reach Earth from the Sun. But does light get tired of traveling? The answer is no. Light doesn't get tired of traveling. Light is electromagnetic radiation. It's made of photons, which are massless particles that travel at the speed of light. Photons don't have a rest mass, but they do have momentum and energy. The energy of a photon is given by the equation E equals hn, where h is Planck's constant and n is the frequency of the light. The momentum of a photon is given by the equation P equals h divided by L, where L is the wavelength of the light. The speed of light is given by the equation C equals Ln, and this tells us that the energy of a photon is related to its momentum by the equation E equals Pc. Now if we take the relativistic energy-momentum relation, which is E squared equals P squared times C squared plus m squared times c to the fourth, and we set the rest mass m equal to 0, which is the case for a photon, we end up with the equation E equals Pc. So the energy of a photon is always equal to its momentum times the speed of light. This means that photons can never be at rest because if they were at rest, their momentum would be zero, which means their energy would be zero, which means they wouldn't exist. So photons are always traveling at the speed of light, and they never get tired of traveling. That's all I got. Thanks for watching. Ask your questions in the comments below, and we'll see you next time. Pride crumbled. Survival demanded surrender. Vorthon chose peace. Within minutes, the Krellian fleet was expelled from human space. The 100,000 ships of the Krellian armada were unharmed, but they were shaken to their core. No shot fired. No army needed. Humanity had rendered their overwhelming power useless. Vorthon's final words to his empire became legend. The humans do not fight war. They make war impossible. And across the galaxy, empires began to speak differently of the mysterious Terrans. To challenge human space was to disappear forever into an endless fractal prison of folded timelines. But to come as a friend, however, was to be welcomed into trade, culture, and fellowship. This is how humanity turned weakness into omnipotence, through the Tesseract defense grid, through the legend of the one-way ticket zone. It began with the Krelians. Their armada appeared over the Sol system in 2487. Their leader, Vorthon, hailed us as a lesser species to bend before its might or be destroyed. The Terran Federation was barely interstellar at the time, a collection of human states hanging on to the remnants of the old Earth nations. We were vastly outnumbered, outgunned, and without allies. But we had something the Krell did not. We had the zone. I have written of it before, that sliver of space off the Hyad sector. When the Krells jumped in, they expected an easy victory, but our weapons were not of this galaxy, and the armies they unleashed against us fell into an abyss that devoured them whole. For every ship that entered the zone, none came out. Those who tried became lost in an infinite echo of the past where even the memory of their existence faded to nothing. So we fought back, not with armies or navies, but by turning the enemy's own weapons against them. We infected their communication arrays with nanites that erased their directives, twisting their targeting computers until the Krell warships were fighting one another. We used their momentum against them, boosting their fighters into the sun with tractor beam walkers. And when Vor then attempted to flee into the very dimension that had swallowed his fleet, we let him go. What was the point of total war? When the enemy is destroyed, there is no one to conquer. There is only vengeance. And what purpose did that serve? But by destroying his fleet, we made Vor then an offer he could not refuse. Surrender your forces and live. Submit and become our ally. Or leave and never return. He chose peace. And with that decision, the war was over. We let the Krellian ships pass through the border unmolested. As they turned tail and fled, a single transport remained. Vorin stood alone before us, stripped of his fleet, his power, his empire. And what did humanity do? The greatest power in the galaxy. Can you guess? The greatest power in the galaxy does not always look like a conqueror. Sometimes it looks like an olive branch. I am amused by those who would claim that humanity has changed since the dawn of the modern age. If you think that the nation which built weapons of mass annihilation out of nuclear fire would recoil at the sight of blood, you have not been paying attention. The change is not within us, but around us. For what we lack in strength, we have always made up for in cunning. It is the difference between a cornered animal and a hunter. One fights to survive. The other strikes when and where it is advantageous. The human animal has always been quick to learn, quicker still to adapt. Before the rise of the modern era, we lived amongst the stars as squabbling children playing at exploration, trading colonies and resources like some kind of galactic flotsam. But what happens when those children become adults? When the youngest colony raises its first fleet and walks away from the cradle with its head held high, the galaxy changes. Its rulers shifted on their thrones and took notice. When the young nation with the lion's heart and the hive mind for strategy stepped onto the stage of galactic politics, all eyes turned to watch the new player. For if we may be weak in ourselves, we are tenacious as a species, and tenacity can be a far deadlier weapon than any battleship. So the Krelians did what any self-respecting empire would do. They sent a fleet to teach us a lesson about galactic realities. And what happened next shocked the galaxy. How did a ragtag collection of human colonies defeat a Krelian invasion force? By turning their technology against them. You don't need armies when you've got tractor beams. Find out how in my video on the one-way ticket zone. Check it out here.